Thank you for joining us for 3Bs on the Law podcast, hosted by Trisha Barita, Kamil Canale, and Susan Dawson. Disclaimer, this podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only, not meant to provide legal advice, and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Also, remember, laws change or they differ by jurisdiction, so this is not a substitute for seeking legal counsel in your jurisdiction on the current law applicable to you.
Hi, and welcome to the special California edition of 3Bs on the Law. Today, I've invited one of my law partners, Lindy Bradley, who's been also practicing for about 20 years. She specializes in supermarkets, restaurants, and retail. She's a member of the Food Consultants Group, and she's also on the board of the directors for the Association of Southern California Defense Counsel. She's a great partner. She always has great input into all kinds of topics. But I thought that because supermarket safety is such a big deal today, and supermarkets have had to make so many changes, especially here in California, due to COVID-19, not only for their customers, but also for their grocery and other retail workers, that I thought I would have Lindy come on to discuss various risk management issues, including personal injuries, and one of my favorite topics, incident reports. So Lindy, without further ado, welcome. I really appreciate your coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us, first and foremost, what kind of safety changes have supermarkets in particular had to make due to COVID-19?
So in terms of safety, there's really two categories of safety that have been modified substantially since the beginning of COVID, and that would be how people coming into the market are using a market in a different way, and also how the market itself is responding in terms of safety of both customers and its own employees. So on the customer side, anybody who has been to the market knows that there's a lot of substantial changes that have happened in places where we might have been able to go and have, let's say, a serve yourself area, salad bars, olive bars, any kind of area where multiple people are touching food directly. Those have largely been eliminated in most, if not all, stores. So supermarkets are also instituting distance between customers by placing, tape X's in different places, maybe the lines where you're paying for your food. Also in areas where people are shopping, they're also developing two different lanes of travel so that people can sort of navigate this new area a little more carefully. Most California supermarkets, I think at this point, are requiring masks for customers coming into the store. They're certainly requiring masks for employees. And so just in the way that we do business in markets, there's been a substantial change in even how we interact, let's say, with the cashier. Whereas you might have handed money to a cashier before, most stores are going to contactless payment. And also if you are paying with cash, you're placing your money down on a counter and it's being taken separately from actually touching hands with someone who works at the supermarket. And those are just a few of the changes. The cleaning procedure for supermarkets has changed drastically. We have now more contactless pay with cashiers, and all of the high touch areas that customers are used to being in contact with are being cleaned more frequently. Things like shopping carts, hand carts, the areas where you're required to press a button to pay for your credit card, things that are in close contact with customers, such as restrooms. Anything that involves handling waste materials is going to be a high priority for keeping cleanliness as a number one. So,
and what about workers? I mean, the whole way food is prepared, especially for the stores that have delis and things like that, has changed, hasn't it?
It has. The way that supermarkets are protecting their own employees at this point include things like higher safety standards that that you see in things like food preparation. People that are working in the actual industry of preparing raw meats, things like that, are actually utilizing standards of care, which include face masks and face shields, so that there's a double layer of protection. Some companies are also minimizing the amount of staff that's working on certain activities so that there are less people in certain preparation areas, and that their work areas are now spread out. That may lead to some slowdown of certain essential services. It was difficult for a while for people to get fresh meat regularly because of the delay in the meat industry, resulting from high infection rates. So extra steps have been taken in that particular area of food preparation so that the risk of exposure is lessened for employees.
Right. One of the things I thought was interesting is one of the local markets here, I happened just to be shopping at a time where they were actually closing off an entire section of the supermarket in the bakery to remove all of the food and wipe down all of the touch points and all of the packaging for the baked goods before they put it back. And so you didn't have access to that point in the store. And I thought, wow, that's even going above and beyond what I think the minimum guidelines are at this juncture. So I thought that was just an interesting observation.
I think that's a place I'd want to shop. And I think that those extra steps are just good practices for keeping the actual physical supermarket in a safe place. If we have a situation where there has been an exposure to COVID, we know that supermarket and restaurant workers are all frontline folks that are out there to help ensure that people are able to get food and are a necessary service. And they're also testing positive for COVID. And so all these extra steps to try to keep them protected are necessary so that we can keep, things moving. But some of the things that happen when an employee tests positive is that employee is taken out of their work. They need to not be in the supermarket. And then there's a notification process in which any employee that's had a direct exposure to anyone who tests positive for COVID is notified. And depending on the closeness of the contact, they may also be asked not to be in a supermarket setting as well. I think the most positive thing that's probably come out of all of this is everyone's awareness of the necessity of washing your hands and really keeping your hands washed all the time. Not just in supermarkets, but for all of us, and especially in supermarkets when there is active food handling. That's something that's also been incorporated into a more regular function for supermarkets.
Right. I know I'm a chronic hand washer, as you know. And so that was something that, quite frankly, my hand washing habits haven't really changed that much due to COVID, because I always have just washed my hands. Because I have dogs and other, things that I touch that are, gross. I have constantly washed my hands. But I think that practice just in general makes the entire food industry safer. Quite frankly, the awareness.
And there's also guidelines that many supermarkets are following. They follow Codex General Principles. The World Health Organization has also placed a lot of information into the public forum that allows people who are concerned about going to the supermarket with additional information on how they can protect themselves, and also for supermarkets and restaurants, how they protect their customers when they are able to either come in. Right now, we don't have in dining in California, but outside dining is being permitted. So there are definitely, if you've taken the step to go out in public and eat in public, you'll see that it's a very different dining experience for people than it was back in, let's say, February of 2020. Right. Yeah,
for sure. I actually haven't been back into a restaurant yet. So, and that was something, that I did frequently prior to COVID. So I am anxious for that vaccine to get back out there. Mm-hmm. But in addition to all of these safety factors that have put in place, supermarkets are one of the industries that has almost thrived during COVID because everybody needs to eat. And so the risk management that existed prior to COVID of the slips and falls and things like that still exists. And then you have this added layer of safety protocols because, God forbid someone alleges that they got COVID from the local supermarket because someone wasn't masked up and there was an outbreak. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the risk management and the types of litigation that arise out of supermarkets.
So it's definitely, what's interesting to me because of my my specialty, but I wasn't sure what would happen when all of this COVID closure happened in California, because at first people were very nervous to go to supermarkets, and now that it took a minute, but I think that the online shopping services have now hired hundreds of thousands of shoppers to take up the mantle of in-person shopping for folks who are either at risk or who simply just don't want to go to the supermarket. And where you think that the supermarket might not be busy anymore, actually those shoppers have replaced everyday regular shoppers. And even though we're in a different scenario with COVID, the same risks in supermarkets apply. And while supermarkets are being extremely careful with how they protect people from, let's say, a COVID exposure potentially, people still slip and fall in supermarkets. And the same things that were being purchased before are being purchased now, and people are making the same claims of injury in that setting as they ever were. I'm sure there will be a wave of COVID-based claims that we'll see in the horizon, probably in every area, including supermarkets, because they're essential services. But the kind of cases that I'm seeing are sort of on one hand, they're on the 2-year tail of the statute of limitations. So a lot of them are pre-COVID, but a lot of people are also filing almost immediately after having a claim and within months. So I've actually got active lawsuits for people that are claiming to have been injured since the pandemic started. And they're no different.
Right.
than they ever were.
One of the things, and I know we talk about this in the office a lot, is the value of the policies and procedures of the supermarkets in terms of sweeping and looking for hazards within the supermarkets, and the value of an incident report.
So supermarkets have a duty of reasonable care to keep their supermarkets. Restaurants have a duty of reasonable care. It's the standard by which supermarkets are in operation. And so some of the easiest ways for me as a defense attorney to prove reasonable care is through showing evidence of compliance with policies and procedures. I mean, first, a restaurant or a supermarket needs policies and procedures. That would be the most ideal situation. Right. Most do. And the second would be compliance with that. Some of the ways that I would prove reasonable care is through a regular sweep schedule. Although it's certainly a bonus to have it, but it's not a mandatory or necessary thing in order to prove that you've conducted, let's say, reasonable inspections. Most stores have surveillance utilized primarily for avoidance of shrinkage, which means people taking things from the supermarket, but it has a secondary benefit of showing when sweeps occur. And so even if you have a supermarket that doesn't have a written sweep policy, there are other ways to indicate that those policies have been followed. I would also, I prefer to have some kind of reporting that is taken at the time that an incident occurs, so that we can get a firsthand account. Supermarkets are different now, but there are lots of people that are still shopping in markets. So there's always the possibility of witnesses, and right. Witnesses are essential.
One thing I wanted to just cut you off for a second, because one thing is it's great to have the policies, even though they're not required, but you've got to train your employees to follow those policies.
That's very true.
And so nothing hurts, I think, us more and frustrates me more as a defense lawyer is a store or any really client that has a policy that they don't follow.
Well,
it happens. Unfortunately, it does happen every once in a while. And so I thought I just wanted to kind of take a step back and kind of point that out, that if you do have a sweeps policy, you need to be following it.
Yeah, policies can be very helpful, and they can also be harmful if you're not following them. So, in a perfect case, there are policies that get followed. Someone may still get hurt, but, I've had cases in the past where, an inspection has taken place, and within minutes, a customer comes by and takes something off of a produce rack, and maybe a tomato falls on the ground, and the person that comes behind it slips and falls, but you've just had an inspection 6 minutes before. And although it's unfortunate that someone's been harmed, it's not necessarily as a result of the negligence of a supermarket.
Right.
Sometimes it's just an accident.
And so then I apologize. You were starting to talk about surveillance, and I kind of cut you off. But I do want to go back to that, because I love surveillance.
I do too.
When it's happened.
I think when you have a case with good surveillance, look, you can't always have surveillance. There are surveillance cameras in a retail setting that are usually placed in various high activity points, maybe the front door, maybe a cashier area. And then depending on what kind of business you're dealing with, they may be placed throughout, but you don't necessarily have a camera angle on every single incident that occurs. It may just be right outside of the camera angle. But when you do have a camera, and when you do see that a person who's claiming that they injured themselves that didn't actually even fall, I mean, those are very highly defensible cases. And that's good.
And also, over time, witnesses disappear. And so then it becomes the plaintiff's case, and, the plaintiff may have fallen, and 2 or 3 years later, when you're taking their deposition, someone who, slipped and landed on their butt has suddenly slipped and hit their head and was unconscious for 10 minutes. And you can pull up that surveillance video and say, can you show me when you became unconscious? And then let me know when you woke up. And I'm not saying that happens often, but, every once in a while, there's a gem in there.
But when it does, it's magical. When you get a good video, it's truly magical.
And also when you have a bad incident, it helps to document it. Yes. So that everybody knows what happens.
That's another thing that I think is important in terms of defending these cases, is that when someone is making a claim that there's some condition on the property that has affected them or injured them, that photographs are taken.
Right.
And even photographs of no condition. So if someone says that they fell in a particular condition and the manager comes and there's absolutely nothing on the floor, I want to see a picture of that too. I want to see what the store looked like on that day, so that I can utilize it later. And, in some cases, it helps me to identify a case where it may merit settlement or some other course of action. And that's helpful as well. It's not obviously prefer for nothing to happen, but if it does, then you want to have that information as accurately as possible.
Awesome, Lindy. This has been a fabulous conversation. I really appreciate your coming on today. If people want to get in touch with you, how can they get in touch with you?
I can be reached at lbradley@bglawyers.com.
And that's B as in boy, G as in girl, lawyers with an S.com, right?
That's correct.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on this episode of 3 B's on the Law. Thank you for joining us on today's podcast of 3 B's on the Law. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast. We also welcome any comments. If you'd like to get in touch with us or suggest a future topic, you can email us at 3THREEBsonthelaw@gmail.com. And because we're lawyers, we need to remind you that this podcast is not meant to provide you with legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.